Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming on over to my YouTube channel. And I'm excited to bring you an interview that I got a chance to do with former Orange County District Attorney Matt Murphy to talk about his new book, The Book of Murder, A Prosecutor's Journey Through Love and Death, which will be available any place you get your books on Tuesday, September 17th. I had a chance to meet Matt at CrimeCon this year, and I definitely knew I wanted to sit down and talk about this book, which I absolutely loved. And I also hope with Cinema Centuries, we can bring you more interviews like this, talking about the things that we love and the folks we love. And I hope you love this talk about love and loss and a storied career, but also some nerdy stuff as well with Matt Murphy. Well, I appreciate, so you're back home now?
No,
No, you're
I'm
in New
back.
York.
I'm in New York.
Okay.
I have a place here. So,
Okay.
but no, home is Manhattan Beach.
Okay. But I was
So,
like, because to be fair, the shark behind you looks like that could be
oh,
something that you might have in your house based on like
that's
diving whatnot.
that's
So
that's that's to remind me. That's to remind me. So, I took that photo
oh, you did?
in a
That's
place called Cabo Plomo. I love that image. So I wake up to that. That that's about a 10-foot male bull shark that we were diving a wreck, and he was kind of curious and swam right at me. It's so awesome. So I'm videoing an eel, and then a little
okay.
puffer fish pops out, and then you see this shadow in the background, and the thing just does a right turn, and he rubbed his fin against the GoPro as he's going by. It's like scrapes it against it. It's just curious.
What's this?
Yeah, yeah. Are you edible? I think is what he was thinking.
Yeah, he's
So
like, do you have any cuts anywhere that will give me a sense of your smell and if
yeah,
you taste delicious?
yep. So he was trying to figure me out. So
Yeah, that's fair. I'm glad that he didn't.
yeah,
Yeah, and like the funny I was thinking about it this morning. I'm like, normally if you were home, you'd literally be up the freeway from me, and yet here we are. We're in
yeah.
New York
Across the
right now.
country.
So are you doing a bunch of press back there too?
Yeah. So next, the book comes out on Tuesday. So I've
Yeah.
got a bunch of stuff lined up like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday here in New York. Then I fly to Indianapolis, and then from there back to LA, then San Diego, then Salt Lake City, and then probably back out here. Although I'm trying to do some stops in like places I've never been before.
Sure.
Want to go to like there might do a signing in Louisville, Kentucky, and
Okay.
some stuff, a few random little cities in LA. So hopefully
Yeah,
it works out.
that'd be nice. That'd be real nice. Well, I hope everything goes smoothly and people are kind.
Yeah, thank you. Thank
The
you.
public is a
So
lot.
far everybody's been very nice.
Okay,
So yeah,
that's
I have a
good.
feeling that the public defenders of Orange County will review bomb this as soon as they get the chance, because A, it's how they roll, and B, a lot of the cases in the book were cases that they, were against them, and they didn't win any of them. So yeah.
But I mean, I have that's one of the things though I have to say is like you were like really kind to people in this book, and the
Thank you.
people that you didn't have kind things to say, you like didn't mention them by name.
No, I did not. But that one PD that we were talking about, like two public defenders, one was a consummate professional, one was not. He's like their idol. He's like they pray to the god of, like, they have a shrine for that guy, and he is a lunatic. And the only lawyer I've ever dealt with that I didn't shake their hand at the end. And
Wow.
I've tried 250 cases because he went after the family, and the man has no shame. And so I was as complimentary towards him as I could be, but also it's like there really is a hypocrisy there. Your
Yeah.
job is to defend people from false accusations. That is the job of a defense lawyer. That's what I'm doing now. Like, I'm working in defense, and it's what a great country, right? Like, our system is such that you have a professional who defends you, and that's his calling in life. And then he's figured out that the best way to defend his clients in his brain is to make false accusations against everybody else, like falsely accuse the detective, falsely accuse the prosecutor, falsely accuse the judge, and in that case, falsely accuse the bereaved father of one of the victims. So yeah, Yeah, but they'll read that. They'll read it looking for some sort of statement that they can use on appeal, and then they'll read my takedown on that, like the hypocrisy of that. He's those guys. They have become exactly what they profess to abhor. Purveyors of the false accusation, and he knows it. He knows it's false and it's not right. So anyway, yeah, though I do not expect a lot of love, even though I had a lot of good friends in that office coming up, and I was always fair, and I'd always open up my files to them. So, but it's also just kind of how they roll. They're not going to like it, especially if the book is successful. They're going to hate that. So,
Well, but like, guess what? The difference between people who write a book and people who don't write a book is that you wrote a book.
yeah, right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
like
one of us wrote a book and one of us didn't. Right.
And I don't think that because it's challenging when you're being critical of folks, right? Like it's challenging when you are having to, because like in this space, and I really feel like when you talk about a lot of the PDs in the cases, like you're not attacking them. You're talking about their client and these theories that these wild tales that the client is coming up with, right? And to your
Yeah.
point, like I think that people forget that public defenders are there to defend against false accusations, not to not by any means necessary,
Right.
not to clog up the legal system, not like all of these things that are the negative and the antithesis of what they're supposed to be doing. Like if you live that, guess what? You have to lie in the bed that you've made for yourself. Like some
Right.
choices you make other choices for you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. It's true. And you're right. I mean, I don't criticize any. I don't think I criticize any of the defense lawyers.
I don't think you. No, you
except
don't.
for that one.
Except for that one.
Yeah. And that was I think it was 198 hearings before it finally went to trial.
When I read that, I was like,
yeah.
What?
198, and the judge got so frustrated he recused himself. That happened. There's almost no media on it. I'd never heard of anything like that before. The judge basically came out and in effect said, I am so like I see the tactics that you're using, and I found myself rooting for the prosecution because basically you're so outrageous and unethical, and that's not proper judicial thinking. And and he was right, but geez Louise, that's a statement of how bad that got in that case.
Well, and I've seen other cases where judges should have recused themselves.
Oh yeah, big time. Totally. And more than one of those, more than one. Yeah.
But, where you're like, this shouldn't be for you, but like, what do you get to say? You can't say anything.
Yeah. And another one that's not in the book is my lead detective, who I love to death. His name's Jose Morales. Just true blue, honest, hardworking guy. And his daughter was killed in a motorcycle accident during the trial. And I think about 10 days later is when the defense lawyer accused him of some, dastardly conspiracy to hide evidence that was patently and demonstrably untrue. And there's just no, like, it really is. It's a win at all costs, sabotage the prosecution's case no matter what you have to do, because it's a death penalty case, and they wrap themselves up in that as if there will ever be another execution in the state of California, and I don't know. I just I don't know. I literally have shaken the hand of every opponent I've ever tried a case, including his co-counsel. Made it a point and treated her very well, and she was the consummate professional throughout. But I don't know. There's a line that I've seen crossed once in my career, and it was crossed in that case. And let's not forget, his client confessed to the most diabolical double murder, imaginable. And yeah. So anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. When I read that part, I was like, oh, this, like, I saw you didn't mention names, and I was like, oh, I think Matt's about to tell us more things.
Yeah. Oh, and let me tell you, the briefs that went back and forth in that thing. Yeah, I could take up all our time telling you about the wild stuff that lawyer did in that case. And there's no love lost between us at all. And that's another thing. I don't understand how people can get righteously indignant when they're completely in the wrong. Like I understand zealously representing your client. I do that now too. Totally get that.
Yeah.
When you're literally making accusations against the victim's family, um, you know, I'm sorry, you cross the line. You cross the line as a lawyer. There's no justifying that. And people can wrap themselves up in the idea of like, well, I'm opposing the death penalty. I believe the death penalty is barbaric. Ergo, thusly, I am justified now in everything I do. You know, the ends don't justify the means. They
No.
never have. You know,
No.
the ancient Greeks figured that one out as a philosophical concept about 3,000 years ago, and it hasn't changed, and it doesn't change just because you're defending a death penalty case, you know.
Right.
And especially that one, my God, you know, the stuff that Daniel Wozniak did in that case, you know, he cut off a human head and then went and acted in a play, you know, and was laughing, and you know, it's just, he used a beautiful, innocent 23-year-old woman as a decoy by murdering her to throw police off the scent, you
Yeah.
know. And it's like, and then confessed to the whole thing, like zero issues on that. He wasn't beaten with rubber hoses. The guy did it. His DNA was everywhere. He actually committed that crime. He really did it. And like the amount of, I wish I could have borrowed from some of the evidence that I had in that case, because it was so overwhelming. Forensically, we had everything you could ever want, and loan it to some of my harder ones, you know, because it was like, there's just zero question that that guy committed that crime. He really did it. He admitted it. Everything you could ever want as a prosecutor. We had cell phone, you know, recordings. We had everything. We had his DNA on the bag of evidence, you know. And so it's like, you know, and I thought they put on, you know, a very good defense with what they had to work with,
Right.
you know. And I don't even take issue necessarily with, you know, a whole bunch of pretrial hearings to make sure that it's done right, because, you know, even though he's never going to be executed in the state of California, and Gavin Newsom's already moved him off of death row, to work in some BS thing that the victims didn't want, under the guise of, you know, paying restitution that they absolutely do not want. Um, you know, you don't, you don't make it worse for that poor family by accusing them of misconduct,
No.
you know.
No.
And he did. And he accused a news organization of a bunch of stuff they didn't do as well. And it's just, you know, anyway, that was but the jury came back on that one with the fastest death verdict in the history of Orange
I
County.
saw that.
Yeah.
And
So,
I gotta tell you that case in weird like ways is very personal for me, because one, I went to OCC. I
okay.
was involved in theater at OCC. I
Wow.
was in the Hunger Artists when they first started.
Oh my gosh. No kidding.
And
So,
then my friend now lives in that apartment complex.
wow.
And
Yeah. So,
I think about them all the time.
wow. So you really, that really strikes home for you then. I mean, you
Oh,
were in that world.
I was in that world, and I'm just like, it was one of those things where because outside of the final case in the book, like I'm familiar with all the cases. And as somebody who, like, I grew up in Orange County, like born and raised Southern Californian, which I know you are as well, right? Which
Yep.
is rare in our world. Like people are like, you didn't move here from somewhere? Like, no, I was
Right.
born and raised here, right? And so you know, when I first learned about that, being like, oh my gosh, like you're it's a few years off, but like you're very much in my world, and you are affecting people. Like I still know the people that run Hunger Artists, and thinking about, like, I cannot get Steve Hare's face out of my mind. I know that father. I know him. Like, I feel like I will know him till the day I leave this earth, because of the pain and the loss and the cruel irony of Sam making it back from being, you know, serving active duty. And to deal with that is just horrific. And I work with vets here. So I work at Cal State Fullerton. So also, like, other cases coming up, and we've had, you know, we had a murder here on our campus in 2019. Like it's so the Orange County aspect for it, for all of these things is like really, really personal. But yeah, that like I, you know, uh, I'm reading through those texts that Wozniak was sending to Julie, and it's like all Julie was trying to do is be a good friend, right? And even when the texts were weird about like no sex, and she's like, oh God, no, like it all she was doing was being a good friend.
Right.
And like, like you lay out in the book, like he could have probably gotten away for it with it for at least a bit longer if he just said, oh, this vet went on the lam and, you know, disappeared. But he had to bring that. But again, it's like that ego, that drive. And I think that's one of the things that strikes me about it so much because of knowing actors, knowing people in the entertainment industry and how fast they like turn things on and off. And it's just like he thought he was so much smarter than everybody else. And I have a lot of feelings about Rachel, like, oh, so many feelings about Rachel, but like here is this man who just was so much wrapped up in his own ego and his own fantasy that like I'll just talk my way out of this.
Well, not only that, but remember he left that wedding invitation at the murder scene.
Yeah.
And that was a plan. He knew that. He did that. I've always believed, inviting the police to come and talk to him so that he could corroborate his own scene, which it is the height of arrogance. And you just hit the nail on the head, for a lot of these guys, if you can, when you're talking about the types of people that will murder others for money, in this absolutely cold-blooded, well thought out, it's like Skylar De Leon or Eric Naposki and Annette Johnson with the Bill McLaughlin murder. There's a certain type. They're not exactly serial killers. In a way, they're almost worse because they're doing it. They have such a cavalier disregard for the sanctity of human life that in Wozniak's case, he was going to go on a super bitchin' honeymoon. That was it. And you on his Google searches, you could see it was like, how loud is a gunshot? And then the next search is like cruise lines in the Caribbean for honeymooners. Like there's an old saying, there's no machine that can read somebody's mind yet, but there kind of is, and it's called Google. And when you get into some of those forensic searches, you can see exactly what he is thinking. Like, I gotta get into the nuts and bolts of actually committing this murder and getting away with it so that I can go on a honeymoon with my fiance. Like, it is utterly diabolical. But you're right. It's the worst part about that case for me was the idea that when you take his plan and you think it through just a little bit, the worst thing he could do to get away with it was to murder Julie. Because as a murdering Sam Hare alone, and Sam didn't just serve overseas. He was in Camp Keating in the Korengal Valley. This guy he saw 83 days in a row of actual hours-long combat. I mean, it's like John Wayne movie stuff. And a lot of people, like I got a couple good buddies that they re-up. They were Marines when we were in college, and they re-signed up and they went to Iraq. And both of them never saw any action, and they wanted to, and God bless our troops and everybody that served during that time. But they just went over there and they're ready to engage. But they went during times where it was stable and peaceful. Sam Hare's experience was war in the purest sense of war. So he survives, the Taliban trying to kill him. Right. And he comes home and he gets killed by a doughy, pudgy community theater actor. And no offense to community theater actors, but that guy whose fiance walked all over him, like, that's the guy that kills a war hero. You know what I mean? And the plan, all he needed to do, like, by murdering Sam Hare, he had his phone, he had his ATM card, and he had his pen. And all he needed to do was send out a text message to everybody using his phone. Hey, I've got some thinking to do, or got a job interview, whatever, fill in the blank, whatever story you want to make up. And all that would have happened is the hairs would have been at the Costa Mesa Police Department going, this makes no sense. And nobody would have looked for him. And it would have looked like every other missing persons case where they turn up in Vegas or in rehab or whatever. And nobody would have done anything to even look for him for at least a month.
Right.
And so that's lowest priority. Car is missing. We've got evidence that he's decided to take a cross-country trip. Everything looks fine. And the parents would be saying, this just doesn't feel right. It would have taken a month, maybe 2 months, 3 months before, with all the, priorities and everything else that would have even kicked into gear. And instead, he murders Julie and stages this crime scene. So now it looks like crazed combat vet on the loose with a gun. So
Right.
now every cop in Southern California, it's just the stupidest plan. Like, it's like, dude, not only did you not need to kill her, you idiot, you guaranteed that it was going to be the top of everybody's priority list. Like, how could you not work that out? Like, to plan this thing out so carefully, like that doesn't occur to you? It's almost like the Newport Beach murders with Skylar and Tom and Jackie Hawks.
Oh.
It's so elaborately planned, but no provision for their suffering. Tied them alive to an anchor begging for their lives. Like, really, you can't give them like just to put them out of their suffering. Like, there's no plan for that. You're just going to drown them. And that's one of that's where the real cruelty comes out in a lot of these murders. And there's a lot of people with good hearts. You almost want to feel sorry for those that have committed some of these horrible murders. Like, it's a natural instinct. Like, oh, what was he going through? Oh, what could have driven him to that? You see that all the time in serial killer cases. Like, what happened to him as a child? And the disturbing part is the real answer most of the time is nothing. Nothing happened to him as a child. Financially, Daniel Wozniak was dealing with the same financial issues we all deal with all the time. Like, every one of us has lived paycheck to paycheck at one time and not wanting to go to work. Like, we've all been there, and yet we strap it on and we go to work anyway, and we get through it. And that's part of the social compact that good people do, and the people that want to cut corners like that by murdering other people are horrible, lamentable human beings. And the sad reality is the vast majority of them are worthy of zero of our sympathy. And that's the truth. And in fact, my next book, I had so much fun writing the Rodney Alcala section on this. We're working on it. The next one's going to be about some of the serial killers I prosecuted.
Wow.
I did one, but I couldn't fit all these awesome cases into my first book. So basically, there's a sequel coming, and it's focused around serial killers. And that's one of the fascinating things about those guys. Like, they time in, time out, over and over again. Like I talk about in the book, I was on a search for Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs. Weird, creepy guy with the van and the weird house. And that's not the reality of serial killers. The reality of serial killers is it's the guy standing in front of us at Starbucks that you don't even look at twice because they fit right in.
Oh,
which
yeah.
is why Jack the Ripper got away with it. Absolutely.
Well, and I mean, and that's something, right, that, like, there's so many things I want to unpack right there, right? So, one, talking, because I work with and teach people about, like, trauma informed practice and what does trauma look like in people when it's activated. And, one of the things we say all the time is trauma might be a reason for behavior, but it's not an excuse. Because, like, we've all been through things, and we're not here to, like, measure what anyone's been through, but, like, the rest of us function in the world. We figure it out. We move through. But then when you're even saying, like, not abuse, not this horrible, like, because, there are definitely serial killers out there that we've heard some stories about where you're like, oh, okay, maybe.
Sure.
But, like, at the same time, to other someone so much that you can decide that, like, Sam Hare's life, like, $62,000, yeah, that's worth this, right? And then the arrogance of Wozniak to then go do a show and sing and dance and miss the entire irony of his performance and the character he was playing, and then to come back and switch gears again to Lord Julian, right? The Hawks case, as soon as you started writing about that, I was like, oh, this is the Hawks and the yacht. Like that is another case that like it breaks my heart. I grew up on boats. I was a rower at OCC as well. Like, these are things like these are spaces. You understand those kind of folks. You're somebody who knows people with boats and goes out on boats with surf trips and dives and like so like even if you don't know these folks, you know these folks, right? And so thinking about that ability to separate human life and the idea that this is somebody's mother, son, aunt, uncle, cut, whatever it is, right? Friend is just it boggles us because we don't operate like that, right? Like we just don't operate like that. We can't look at someone and just be like, yeah, that's 6,000, 10,000. Like, oh, let me get out of this. Like the case around with Chris Smith, right? Like, oh, I'm gonna, get myself out of this debt and I'm just gonna like murder this person and then create this entire elaborate traumatic ruse. Like it's already traumatic enough to lose somebody to murder, homicide, an accident, death comes in a lot of forms and it all has its own grief to deal with. But then on top of that, to be poor Chris's fiance who thinks like all of a sudden the man she had planned her future with has run off with a model, a former playmate, his parents to be worried getting these emails and like thinking about okay, he's traveling, but maybe he's not being safe. But then, oh my gosh, now he's going to Africa to sell Krugerrands, like, and then on top of it, oh, maybe he thinks he's going to end it all, and that fear and that trauma. But then ultimately finding out it's like way worse than that. Like we don't comprehend that because, and I say we like as the average collective don't comprehend that because we don't operate.
Right. Well, you're absolutely right about the childhood abuse thing in the De Leon trial. And I think I talked about this in the book. In the penalty phase, they put his mother on to talk about his traumatic childhood, which did not exist.
Right.
But she just is describing this party that they had, like they're big partiers. Her and her ex-husband. I'm sure that was true, but little Skylar fell in the pool. And she's like, oh, we weren't really paying attention. Somebody had it, and he was so terrified, and he almost drowned without picking up on the irony. It's like, was he tied to an anchor? Like he knows if he had that experience, he knows how bad it is. And where you see this a lot as a prosecutor, I spent 4 years in sexual assault, and you see that all the time. As like the defense will argue as a factor of mitigation that the person was sexually abused as a child.
Right.
And it's like, well, you know what? It's not an effing vampire bite. That guy knows better than anybody then how bad being abused as a child is, which means by him turning around and then abusing other children, it is worse. It is worse. It was somebody that has experienced that pain. They make the clear decision that they're going to inflict on other people. Like, you literally have no excuses. Not only is it not an excuse, it's not mitigating. It is aggravating that it. And Skylar was a surfer, and they're one of their big stories of mitigation is he almost drowned in a swimming pool. And it's like, how does that not make it 1,000 times worse when he knows how horrible that is? So I don't know. These I miss the job every day, as you can probably tell, as I fire up on this, because there's madness that goes along with this sometimes. And I worked with great people who some wonderful professionals that made me look good in court, like these detectives and the forensic scientists that are behind the scenes on all these cases. But I relished the opportunity to come out and in a lot of these cases and point out like the abject rank hypocrisy of some of the things that these killers were claiming in their trials. And kind of lived for it, probably to an unhealthy degree at a certain point. So that's why I decided to write the book above everything. We have we had so many great stories and amazing experiences that I wanted to share with people, sort of so they, maybe educate, folks on, like some of the murder concepts. Like I explained them to juries for so many years, almost 2 decades, that, I thought it might be interesting to break it down for the reader. Like, what is a first degree murder? What is a second degree murder? How does voluntary manslaughter work? And I use the same analogies that I used in trial. And hopefully you enjoyed that part when you read it.
I did. And the thing that I really want to compliment you on that, because I think you did a really good job of being a bridge builder, right? There is like this book as a whole comes across to me as what I call like a conversation you'd have on a golden evening. What I mean by that is like those nights when you're hanging out with friends or people and you just maybe you're having some drinks, you've had a great meal, and then the night just has this like easy ebb and flow from the light and the personal to the heavier to, kind of coming off on a tangent. And I don't mean in a bad way, but like, oh, we're gonna stop over here for a moment and coming back. And like this book felt so true to your voice. And it didn't, when you're sharing those concepts like the cowboys and the way that you're explaining like DNA, like versus like here's the kitten video and here's the algorithm, versus the algorithm. None of that came across as condescending. It didn't come across as mansplaining. It came across as the art that is bridge building as a communicator, right? Because not only as a DA do you have to show the evidence and how the evidence backs up your case, but you also have to bring the everyday people along, the people that don't necessarily have advanced degrees, the people that maybe have only heard these concepts on TV, right? Or in, Law and Order or Dateline or 2020 or any of these things, right? And so that bridge building, I think, is so helpful. And how because I am interested to know how you chose these cases. But I also did notice as with the choices in these cases, Matt, that you really connected everything together and you brought back this like through thread of like going back to the De Leon case and, as opposed to Alcala, like looking at those things. So it's it's beautifully put together and it feels very much like you. And I know like you and I are just getting to know each other and I know that, but like to be able to say that, I think is a real testament to the heart and passion you put into these things.
Well, very kind of you to say, and thank you very much. What's funny about it is that the, like almost nobody has read the book, so you got one of the advanced copies, and so because it's not released
Yeah, I know. It doesn't come out till the
Tuesday.
17th.
So we sent out a few e-galleys, and the publicists sent out a few copies, but I mean, there's probably 30 people in the world that have read this thing right now. So it's very nice to get feedback like that. I'd never written a book before. So when we did the project, my agent really wanted me to work with a professional editor
Yeah.
in trying to structure it. So a lot of that, if it does flow, I can't take credit for it because I had some real pros helping me at Disney, like lay the book out. And there's two editors that were involved in this. One is Jeremy Blackman, who I got to throw a shout out to. I loved working with him, and also Adam Wilson with Hyperion Avenue. I mean, just a couple of real professionals that helped me put it together and structure it, and and a second and third set of eyes was critical. But some of those examples also I can't really take credit for because when I got brought into homicide, I was taught by the very best.
Right.
My old boss, Lou Rosenblum, was truly a master. And I mean, in any job out there, there's somebody that is born to do it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like whether it's, cable lines, one of those guys, or guys that are pipe fitters or welders or doctors or whatever it may be. There's certain people that were just born to do it. And the guys, I feel like they're almost like my big brothers / fathers in that,
Yeah.
in the unit, like Rick King, Chris Evans, guy named Brian Brown, I would go watch them when I was a baby DA, just to see how a master really explains these concepts. And it's, the way I would explain it to juries, were poor man versions of the way these guys would do it. And so I watched Chris Evans. I mean, like, I went to law school. Criminal law is a year, crim pro is another year, and then you
Yeah.
have to study for the bar. And I walk in as a professional lawyer who's passed the California bar, and I'm watching these guys, and it's like, oh, so that's what a voluntary manslaughter is. Now I get it. Like, I understand the legal definition. I can recite it backwards at this point, but oh, that makes sense. So a lot of the book is, for the examples and the education part are, or DNA is another thing. Like, I learned that from masters at the crime lab. There's one woman in particular named Mary Hong, who's retired now, that I must have had Mary on the stand between sexual assault and the homicide. I probably had her on 3 dozen times. And eventually, even a dumb Irishman like me, like, at the podium, about the dozenth time she explained it, I'm like, oh, that kind of makes sense. It's like, ladies and gentlemen, DNA is simple, and I'm going to call the woman who's going to explain it to you. And eventually it was like, oh, okay, we have one from mom, one from dad, 2 alleles per every loci. Like, oh, this is starting to make sense, and
Yeah.
so I try to, take those concepts and explain them in a way that I was able to understand them, and I hopefully it worked.
It does. It
Yeah,
does. I like, and here's the thing, like, I feel like yourself, I'm a words person. Words matter. What we say matters, right? And how we deliver those things. And so, yes, high compliments, but I mean every word of it. And they absolutely work in the book because, again, it's not like, and now let's devote an entire chapter to the science of DNA, where it's like, oh, just,
yeah, right, yeah,
like, because sometimes people get really bogged down in technicalities and it's not their forte, right? Like, my degrees are in the humanities and social sciences. Like,
right.
don't ask me to write the biochem chapter in any book, because I'll be like, it will not sound like me, right? But it's very clear that these are concepts that you're comfortable with, in then sharing in the way that you're comfortable, and that again helps bring people along. And it is, you are giving due credit to all these incredible people. I read the full acknowledgments, and you lay out an incredible amount of thanks and props to people. But I think that is a testament to why you were a winning DA, because this isn't about you. You know that this takes an entire team of people doing all the work from, the first moment that a call comes into dispatch, all the way up to, your court reporters, your judge, like everyone, and of course the families, right? And so that is also very evident to me. And, we're in a space where luckily, like, the true crime world, as far as books and shows, is starting to make that turn more towards victims and their families. But like, it seemed like making sure everyone was named was really important to you.
Yes. The funny thing about doing real trial work, which as a DA you do, I mean, I tried over 250 cases to verdict. I think 133 jury trials total. But you know, my first DUI, I took a beating so severe from this guy named Mike Horan, who's a fantastic lawyer. He's basically coaching me. I think I was 25 years old, or maybe 26, and it was my first municipal court assignment right after I got hired, and it was, of all the sports I've played, of all the surfing I've done, I've surfed big waves on the North Shore. It was the single biggest beating I've ever taken ever on anything. And then about 2 weeks later, I repeated that process on my first misdemeanor bar fight. So I learned very quickly, after you get your head kicked in by these really good lawyers, that I needed all the help I could get. So by the time I got into homicide in particular, for me, I wanted to involve other people. I wanted,
Yeah.
When I would go to the crime scenes, I would want my paralegal there. And, technically she didn't need to be there, but she was sort of always the brains of our operation. And she was wonderful. Her name is Dina Basham. And I would want her to come So that, part of it was, if I was going to be reviewing warrants, I knew Dina would not allow me to make a mistake. So that
Yeah.
was key. But also it always gave my team ownership of those cases. Like they had a
Yeah.
personal connection to that. So it was something that we were doing it together. And she was a paralegal, and a lot of prosecutors that are, vested with that, that kind of support staff, which we got in homicide. There were different relationships, and everybody sort of had their own style. But I wanted to know, like when we were doing jury questionnaires, when the really heavy capital cases, you do questionnaires, especially on the high profile ones. So the defense always requests it, the judge is always going to give it to a degree. And so we were doing these, you read these things endlessly. And I wanted my law clerks to help, and I wanted
Yeah.
my paralegal to help, and my investigator, so that we could powwow, and I could say, what do you guys think of this one? She's like, she listens to, she's a huge, I don't know, probably shouldn't say it, like, she's a Rachel Maddow fan who just bashed the cops for an hour last night. But she's, she also is an aficionado of this author that is kind of pro police. I
Right.
always wanted, like, I wanted as much input as I could get. And I'll tell you what, there's a whole industry out there in the civil law world for jury consultants. And I'll tell you what, the best jury consultant you can ever have sitting next to you as a trial lawyer is a detective who's had to make snap judgments about people because her or his life depended on it, because it really did.
Sure.
And I mean, some of the women and men that I worked with in law enforcement, my God, they're some of the smartest, most savvy people I've ever met in my life. And they're there to do the right thing. And if they're smart enough, they've all had opportunities to go make more money doing something else. And they're there because they have a calling, as corny as that sounds. But I'll tell you what, they're the best judges of character. They're the best, like, jury consultants you can imagine. Just leaning over to, there's a couple of these, my investigators, I don't know why, but I almost always had a woman investigator assigned to me. They were just some of the best humans I've ever known. And I had some great men too, like Larry Montgomery, Don Holford, who I love to death. He was my last investigator. But man, you talk about like a relationship murder, like a domestic violence thing. Having a woman investigator to be able to break down like what some of the women on the jury might be thinking, like,
Oh,
and they can see things that I missed, and so
yeah.
for me, involving my whole team in as many aspects as they were willing to suffer through with me, I had no ego in it at all. And I didn't even I don't feel like the book even did it justice. The help that I had behind the scenes by these people that were so smart and so dedicated and so good, and kind of made me look good by making sure I kicked the loony juror that I thought was just fine. And and that's another experience you have over and over again as a young DA, especially when you don't have any help. Like, I mean, I could tell you stories until you were bored, but like I had a guy once that, when I was on what's called the felony panel, this guy showed up and he seemed fine. He was dressed appropriately and he answered the questions okay, and looked fine to me. And then the next day he showed up wearing the exact same clothes, followed the next day by
Uh,
the exact same clothes. And it turns out he was a total lunatic. And I let him on my jury. And then and the rest of the poor jurors, I think they were out like 4 days on that one before he finally said something crazy enough that the judge finally kicked him off. But it was probably apparent to everybody in the courtroom that the guy was crazy, and somehow I just missed it, and it wasn't even like, he wasn't wearing like a t-shirt and jeans. It was like, it was a unique outfit that looked
right.
okay to me that he wore every single day. And then he's like kind of doing this. So I basically, I needed all the help I could get, and I recognized that, and I divested my ego from that very quickly, which I think is a huge reason why I had the success that I did. Was I just worked with great people.
Well, and you bring up this point about like getting that help, but also you start to develop a different sense of things, right? You talk about some of the vibes you got from some of your jury selections and things like that. And I think that sometimes when because I can remember like being in my master's program And my head was so full of information that like I lost my sense of humor for a while because it was like my brain was like, here's where we're at. Like we're just focusing on these things, these aspects. You've got to get through this. You've got to, like on the practicality of everything I've read and everything I've studied. And then it's like as you get into it, I feel like your brain starts to shift to be like, oh yeah, we can compartmentalize, we can blend these things in with these other things. And then you have other people, mentors, colleagues, things like that that come along and show you like you need all of it. You're
Right.
like, oh yeah, that's right. I want to touch on something you said that, you said it's corny, but it's actually something I wrote down as I was reading the book, and that sense of calling. Because you, first of all, you start this book in I think, an unexpected place. Because I think people are going to expect that it's going to be like, here comes Matt being like, and when I was 4 years old, my first sense of justice kicked in when I used to hold trials for, like, but
Frogs.
it's right for frogs, right? Which we love a frog. But you start at heartbreak. You start at the crossroads of all of the things that matter to you, which was this relationship, justice, and your calling as a lawyer, and then surfing. And you start in this space, and spoiler alert, everyone, Matt decides to go all in. And you talk a lot about the sacrifices. You talk a lot about not being the best boyfriend, the best romantic partner. But I think one of the things that really stands out to me in all of that is one, the vulnerability, because you're putting yourself out there in ways that I don't think people will expect from a book like this. But two, I think that people who are not in helping fields and aren't in what I call the trenches with people don't understand the call to that kind of sacrifice. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that for yourself.
Yeah. I had some colleagues in the unit. I mean, first of all, I wasn't alone in this. It's a 24/7 sort of thing. And
Yeah.
when, the last trial I did was my Andrew Urdialis case, which I don't talk about in the book. That's the next book. But that was a serial killer. That trial was 6 months long. I mean, we were in trial for 6 months. And that's 6 months of birthday dinners and holiday dinners. And, it's um, before I rotated in, a lot of those guys like Lou got divorced when he was in the unit. Rick
Yeah.
King got divorced when he was in the unit. Chris Evans, these legends that I was just telling you about. Chris went in single, and I think he was single when he left, which is basically what happened to me. Debbie Lloyd, who is my predecessor for those cities, same thing. She's a absolutely like strikingly beautiful person physically and mentally too, but she went in like she's the type of woman that every man would want. And, she did 12 years and left also unmarried. So there's this, I'm not alone in that, but I also had colleagues that I admired so much because they came in and they somehow were smart enough. And I mean, I think they were geniuses, but to be able to like be really good at homicide prosecutions and also devoted husbands and make it to little league and all that. And mentally for me, I guess I just didn't really have the bandwidth to pull that off because I was I I had, for me to achieve success at that level, I needed to give it my all,
Yeah.
and that's a decision that I made that I talk about a little bit in the book, where it just kind of it occurred to me after, another sort of failed relationship in the middle of it that I just kind of said, screw it. I'm like, all my friends are getting married, everybody's having kids. Maybe it's not for me. Maybe I'm meant to do this instead. Maybe the people I'm supposed to help are these poor victims' families. And so that's basically what I decided to do. And you know, um, I can't say I have any regrets. but it definitely, it took a toll. I never did
Sure.
get married. I never got kids. I rotated out 17 years later, just like Debbie. So it's actually interesting. I'd never thought about this before, but I did 17, Debbie did 12. So I can't even do the math on that. But what is this shows that this is why I went to law school. So for the two prosecutors that had that spot, like Newport Beach, so
29
um,
years.
29 years, right? 29 years of Newport Beach. The prosecutor assigned a homicide never had a successful relationship. Not Debbie, not me. I don't want to talk about who has it now, but yeah. But also Debbie, I don't think Debbie ever lost a case in her run either. So like
Yeah.
the city of Newport had two very dedicated prosecutors for almost 3 decades that took care of business on behalf of the citizens of those communities. So I guess I can at least say that. But yeah, it definitely takes a toll on your personal life. And I some people struggle with it. I did for a bit, and then I decided to just sort of happily sacrifice it so that I could try to do the job as well as I could.
And you did.
I had a very good run, but like I said, most of that success, believe me, it's like my paralegal Dina had a funny saying, like, when I'm in trial, okay, I'm incapable of keeping my keys, my sunglasses, and my wallet together at any given time because one
Mm.
of them will always be missing. And Dina's refrain over and over again was, and she was with me for 15 years of my 17
Yeah.
years in homicide. So, I mean, this woman was, and she remains one of my closest and dearest friends. But her thing was, the struggle is real. The struggle is real, And then there was a time we were going to lunch, and we're all driving out to lunch together. And we were prepping a trial at that point, so we weren't in trial, and we're leaving from the unit. And I couldn't find. I had those earpods, but the wired ones.
Yeah.
I couldn't find them, and I'm like, hey guys, wait, I know they're in here. They got to be in there, and I'm delaying everybody leaving, and I can't find them. And Dina's like, because it's like those old commercials. This is your brain on drugs, right? This is
Yeah.
my brain on trial. And we're just about to start. I've got a million things going on. And I'm like, oh, okay, fine, let's go. Because I was going to leave, wasn't coming back up to the office. So we're driving out of the parking lot. It wasn't me, it wasn't my car.
Yeah.
And we're driving past my car, and my investigator, a woman named Lisa Hunter, who I love to death, is sitting next to Dina in the back seat. My buddy Scott is driving, and I'm in the right front passenger seat. And we drive past my car, and there in my closed car door, dangling, is one of those little white Apple earring things. And Dina goes, is that your car? And Lisa looks, and she turns to Dina, and she goes, he's so stupid. And it's like, guys, we're in the same car. Like, I can hear you right now.
Yeah.
And they're laughing. He's so stupid. So anyway, yeah, it was sort of it. And then after I got a little bit of success rolling, and I won a few, and then I won a few more. And then when we got into a couple of dozen wins in a row, about halfway through my career, it seemed like everybody in the unit appointed themselves guardian of my ego, right? Like, so I got constant crap from everybody I worked with because I was doing some high profile stuff, and I was on
Yeah.
Larry King Live, and I was doing these 2020s, and it was like, and they're like, I know what an idiot you really are. And I talk about that a lot in the book too, some of the behind the scenes, like, the night before jury selection, that I don't want to do this spoiler on that, but when I threw the newspaper at the car on the street, that's a winner, yeah.
But I want to
As Dina
say,
would say, the struggle is real.
no shade to glow in the dark zombie pants. I have glow in the dark skeleton pajama pants, and they are the
Okay.
most comfortable things that I own.
The
So,
most comfortable pajamas I ever wore. I
so
wore those. I went through a phase where I tried to patch those things up because I wore them into rags. Yeah.
you're talking about like your brain on trial. You bring up PAPV psychosis in here, which is post-argument pre-verdict period. And I felt seen by that comment, not because I'm a trial lawyer, but because I'm an overthinker. And so, can you talk a little bit about, the brain on trial and how both the overthinking is both been helpful and also been maybe a curse in
Oh
this life.
gosh. So and again, that was a phrase coined by Rick King when he was my supervisor in sexual assault. And what happens is you live these cases for
Right.
years
Right.
sometimes, and you're totally devoted. And look, the funny thing about being a homicide prosecutor is that in a weird way you have a semblance of control because you decide when there's enough evidence. You can suggest to a group of detectives, hey, why don't we go interview that witness? And you can steer the ship.
Yeah.
And so you have it and it really alleviates a lot of the horror of those cases because you got a job to do, and
Yeah.
you can't get lost in the sadness of these cases because you got to take care of business, and you got to try to bring justice for these families and for the communities, and you got to put the cases together. So you'll live these things, and you wake up in the middle of the night, at least I did, you think about them all the time. And I love to golf, and I would go play with Rick, and I once you you argue your case, so you've had control, and it's like handing the baton off to a jury, and they deliberate back, and you have no idea who they are. You hope you did a good job picking them, but then it's like, for me, it's like it's like the you instantly turn into Woody Allen, and not like the creepy Woody Allen, but like the Woody Allen like at his best, right?
The
Like the
Woody Allen we used to enjoy in
right
Annie Hall.
the hand wringing, like, I can't, maybe I should have done this, or did I wear the wrong socks on that day, or what a stupid argument, and that woman wasn't paying attention to me, and like, you absolutely torture yourself. And I go out golfing with Rick, and he's, we're talking, and I'm just totally absent, and he looks at me and he goes, you got the PAPB psychosis, I can feel it. And I think I argued on like our courts are dark on Fridays, so
Yeah.
the jury, I argued through the afternoon, and they were going to start, they might have had 45 minutes of deliberations before they broke for the weekend. And, in your head, it's like, I've blown it. They should have come back in 10 minutes. Like, if they're
Yeah.
even talking about what did I do wrong? And, and I was, anyway, and it's PAPB psychosis. It's post-argument, pre-verdict psychosis. Rick King coined the phrase, and it's like, you're just useless because you're overthinking, you're beating yourself up, you're reviewing every little mistake you made. And then, fortunately, thank God for me, for my time in homicide, I was always beating myself up over nothing. And I hung one, which was a retrial, and I hung a penalty phase 11-1 once, which we retried and got the death verdict on it. So fortunately for me, every one of those times where I was beating myself up in the homicide unit, it wound up being for naught. Like, the juries always did the right thing at the end. So
Right, but that's hindsight, right? I mean, because it is truly, not a lot of people can say that their job is life and death. But for you and for these families, especially, like, you carry an incredible responsibility because even with all the team, the detectives, the forensic experts, everyone, like, you are becoming the mouthpiece for all of that work. And that is like you're the final stop in that, next to the judge and the jury, right? And so like, it makes sense to me though that you would hold that kind of worry and overanalyzation because you want to do the best for these folks. You want to get some sense of justice because I think anyone that has been in this world in any way knows that, like, there's no real justice because that person or those people are still gone and we don't get them back. But the fact that somebody has to answer for it, the fact that they can say, we have these answers, like, of course you're going to think through every case.
well, yes. And, Orange County, the way Orange County is set up in the vertical system is we would be there at the scene a lot of times. We'd go to the scenes. And so you really do have a sense of the enormity of your responsibility when I mean, there was one that I talk about in the book, with the disco CD. And there's a second part about that I didn't share in the book. And that is, I was there, that was Thanksgiving. So a woman is murdered in her kitchen in Thanksgiving. And you know what happens in Thanksgiving, families come home, and she was cooking dinner, and I was there when her daughter came home, and I watched this, like the apoplectic grief of a loved one learning that her mother has been murdered. That is something that you never forget,
Yeah.
and it stays with you. I mean, and look, I still have dreams all the time. You know, my that dream that where we didn't study, you know, that everybody has, where you're back in school and you have a test and you forgot to drop the class and you got to go
Yep.
take it. That we all have that. I don't really have that dream much anymore. What I have is I'm standing up in front of a jury on one of these cases and they're not listening to me, and
Yeah.
that's my nightmare. And when you see these people that are going through the most horrific grief that you ever can experience as a human being, and that's the murder of a loved one, and the only thing worse than a loved one being murdered is a loved one being murdered and their killer getting away with it.
Yeah.
And that's the responsibility you bear as a prosecutor if you're dedicated. And that's, you know, we'd see some horrific things, like you see decapitated bodies and you see mummified people and you see bones and you see decomp cases and you see little kids on autopsy tables and you see horrific things. But that's not where the psychological stress comes from, believe it or not.
Mm.
It's the fear of failure, yeah,
Yeah.
of failing the family or making some sort of procedural mistake that the Court of Appeal decides is serious enough that the case has to be retried and the family has to go through it again. That became my nightmare, is that you're, you know, and literally I'm standing there in front of a jury. I have this at least once a week, and
Yeah.
they're not listening to me, and I've got a crying family in the front row, and the jury, and I'm failing to bring the justice to these families. And as weird as that might sound, that's my nightmare. It's been my nightmare. It replaced my I didn't study for the test dream that we all have. But that's the thing. You really just you understand when you know, the first thing I always do is give my personal cell phone to the families of the victims and explain the
Mm.
process to them. Once we file charges, we do a big meeting, bring them to the DA's office, introduce ourselves, and let them know like how long it was going to take, how the you know, to kind of give them a little bit of knowledge so they understood what to expect, but also to introduce them to the people that really cared about their case. And but the problem is that, you know, especially in capital case litigation, it takes years and years, like Wozniak, that, you know,
Ugh.
197 hearings or whatever we had on that. You get to know those families very well, and you get to care about them, and you feel horrible for them, and you know what they're going through, and you get to like them. And then you go in and it's like, man, I better not screw this up. And that's where the pressure comes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because you don't want to re-traumatize anyone. You don't want, because it's already going to be traumatizing enough, especially for the families that sit in court and hear about, like, they may already know about the things, or they do know about the things that have happened to their loved ones, and then sitting in court and having to watch, you know, defendants be smug or flippant or argumentative, or a public defender attack a family and a grieving mother and a grieving father and grieving siblings and fiancés and all of that. Like it is so much for them to go through, and it doesn't just it it's never the same. Like it's never better for them.
Right. Right. And those people need I think they need a champion. You know, they need a
Yeah.
champion in the courtroom fighting for them and fighting for the memory of their loved one. And that's, you know, that's what my team and I really tried to do, you know, and we had a lot of success on that, thankfully. So we, you know, the book has about a dozen of the sort of some of the greatest hits, so
Yeah.
to speak, some of the most interesting cases. You know, and then some of the, you know, there's enough meat on the bone, I think, for a second book.
I'm
You know,
excited for it.
I had the Golden State Killer. That was one of the cases I worked on. I had, you know, I did a bunch of serial killers. So I only talk about one in this book. So I really enjoyed the writing process more than I thought I was going to. I thought it'd be like a big English paper, and it's not. It's completely different. It's creative, and it was fun to write about these things, you know, for no other reason to try to share these stories with a larger audience. And Yeah, Rick King. It's funny because The guy's hysterical. I talk about him in the book, but he talks about he had the record. He had 15 years in the homicide unit until I beat him and had 17. And we were playing golf, and he's like, he goes, "You're addicted. You're addicted to these cases." He goes, "You get the needle in the arm, buddy. You get the needle in the arm." And then when I told him about the book, he goes, "Oh, that's just your methadone." By continuing to talk about the cases, it's like it's a sickly sweet little high you're going to get by talking about what once was. So I think he's probably right, but hopefully it's educational for people too.
But don't you think that's also a way for you to process? Because like you don't get to process these things in the same way that other people get to process things because of your job.
It certainly is. And look, another part of this book for those of your, the people that subscribe to you, that I don't want these cases to fall out of public consciousness, because that's when these guys get crazy parole hearings. Right. And that's when, like I want the public to know about these for when our crazy legislature in California eliminates LWOP, life without possibility of parole, and these guys start coming up for parole. Like, I don't want people to forget about these cases. When Skylar De Leon one day gets his freaking parole date, I hope people remember the horror of this case and what he put these families through. And I can say the same thing for every one of those other cases I include. Kathy Torres, Sam Lopez has already been up for parole once, and I want, with a little bit of pressure on the powers that be, it's like, hopefully the public will, recognize what these guys did and will object to them getting out. And I think that, unfortunately, in the modern landscape, we need a little bit of that. So in a way, I'm still fighting for the families by trying to keep these stories alive out there in the public consciousness.
One of the things you wrote in here that I thought was really beautiful is you say the criminal prosecution is in many ways a reckoning for the crime committed. Closing arguments, if done right, are a requiem to the individual whose life was cut far too short, far too soon. They can't say it anymore. So as a prosecutor, you say it for them.
Yeah, that's that really is, I think, when you're for the professional homicide prosecutor, that's what you do. You're this, when a person, and this is going to sound axiomatic to the point of being stupid, but murdering another human being is the most selfish act somebody can do.
Sure.
And we have these precious few moments of life on this planet, and the idea that somebody, for money or anger, or because they're freaking drunk or their ego, snuffs out the light of life from somebody else, that person that was taken away from their loved ones, they deserve their day in court. And some of that, as you talked about, the arrogance of homicide defendants, a lot of them really are that. Some of them are remorseful, some of them feel terrible, some of them are like actual humans, when they committed a horrible act under terrible circumstances, but a lot of them are arrogant pricks. A lot of them really are, and they strut into court with the same arrogance they strutted into the bar that night, or across the fence in the neighbor dispute, or into the kitchen if it's their spouse that they killed. And they need to get taken down a couple notches, especially when they come up with some BS story. And on behalf of the victims, now technically you don't represent the families as a prosecutor. You represent the people of the state of California. In my case, you represent the government, the people you represent, but emotionally, you're going to bat for that family, and you are motivated by that family and what they went through. And your moral responsibility is to try to hold that person account on behalf of the victim. And, and it gets a little spicy sometimes, because it's just, there's the technical stuff, but every once in a while you hear something, when you're listening to defense closing, or maybe a defense cross-examination, you can't, it's very important as a prosecutor, you never make a decision based on emotion, ever. Mm-hmm. But boy, oh boy, sometimes that emotion when you're in trial can fire you up to say the things that you were going to anyway, but you can definitely do it with a little more gusto, just as a human being, like, did I just hear what I freaking thought I heard? And my buddy Dennis that I talked about in the book, I can't remember if I told this story or not. I should know. I'm operating on about 4 hours of sleep right now, considering I've read the book so many times. But anyway, I knew that Dennis and I were going to be very close friends when I was in court in West Court. When he was in the gang unit, I was in the felony panel. Neither of us had ever touched any case halfway interesting. And he's doing his closing, and I'm waiting for the court to break because I've got to go back with another lawyer and take care of some other business. And so I just happened to be there watching Dennis do a closing. And so the way it works is the prosecution goes, then the defense goes, and then the prosecution gets rebuttal. Okay, so I'm in there, and the defense lawyer, who is a very well thought of public defender in Orange County, who I always really liked, but the story was a little out there. And Dennis stands up at the podium, and Dennis is classic because Dennis is a blue collar Boston guy who's one of, I think, 11 kids, and he hitchhiked to California when he was 17, and he worked as a bartender. So Dennis was not pedigree and Ivy League. Dennis was working class, and he was a phenomenal trial lawyer because the guy he had no patience for BS, and he could really speak to the jurors. And Dennis gets up for his rebuttal, and he stands up at the podium, and it's like he starts to speak and he stops himself, and he starts to speak and he stops himself. And he goes, "Ladies and gentlemen, please excuse me for a minute." And he stomps out of the courtroom, like walks, past the swinging doors, out into the hallway. And the judge is looking around like, what is going on? Didn't ask permission to do it, just walked out of the courtroom. And then he comes stomping back in, and he's like, "I'm sorry, folks. I just needed to go and make sure that this was the same courtroom that we heard the evidence in." Like it was just, he was so outraged at what he had just heard. And, and that was a guy, it's like, it was the craziest thing I'd seen up to that point ever done in a courtroom. And I knew instantly, it's like, that kid is going to be one of my best friends. It's like on the playground, like, okay, we're going to be best friends. And we have been ever since. Like, Dennis is one of my closest friends, but it was like, I just watched him do that. Like, they don't teach you that one in law school. But it was perfect. It was perfect because it was the common sense outrage of somebody that couldn't take it. It was like, you got to be kidding me. And and jurors loved Dennis because he would do stuff like that. The judge didn't know what to do. The defense lawyer had no idea what I didn't know what to do. But that's at the end of the day, the really good detectives and the really good prosecutors, I think, are all a little bit crazy because they understand, again, the enormity of their responsibility. And look, the best of the best understand the dark. They've fought their own demons, and they've like you said, they've been in that situation where they've been frustrated at the bar, or when they shouldn't have driven their car, or they've had an argument with a husband or wife where it was getting toxic, and they understand that, and they made the right decisions at that point, not the wrong ones. So they've been there. They relate on a very interpersonal level. And a lot of them also have been the victims of violent crimes in their own right. Jose Morales, that guy that I was talking about, who's my lead on Wozniak. Jose, there was a gang in Santa Ana that attempted to kill him when he was a teenager. Like, he understands violence. He understands gangs. He understands that from a very deeply personal level, and he knows the dark. And when I leaned over to him, and it's like, during jury selection, "Hey, Jose, what do you think about juror number 10? Do we like her or not?" And he said, "She's with you, buddy." He was right, and that's the thing, that, like, and I talk about this a little bit in the book, like when we rotated into the unit, Dennis was a hard swearing, loud, guy. And his office was right between two wonderful lawyers. One was a genuine debutante from the American South, complete with she was she would refer to herself, not me, but she would refer to herself as a Southern lady, like, she was very genteel. And right next to, on the other side was a woman who was the same way, perfectly dressed, Carolyn Carlisle Rains was her name. It was Mary Ann McCallie was the Southern belle at one point in her life, and then a woman named CCR, Carolyn Carlisle Rains, who went to Yale Law. So we're talking about like, and then in between you've got Dennis from Boston who went to like community college, you know,
Right.
and they were all very effective, but Dennis juries loved him because if you're the blue collar guy who's doing jury duty, you know, and you have the perfect diction of, you know, Marianne or CCR versus Dennis, who is like catching himself from dropping the F word every other sentence, you know, jurors typically can relate to a guy like that. And
Yeah.
Dennis was fantastic, you know, just fantastic at what he did.
So one, that story is not in the book. So just
Yeah.
I'm glad that you told it because that's amazing. You know, you talk about knowing the darkness. So, and you talk about surfing in the book, and I've seen you talk about being a gamer. I
Yeah.
real nerdy, Matt. So
Yeah. Yeah.
there's no shade
I
there.
gotcha.
But like what caused you to decide to leave homicide and go into private practice? And two, how do you go towards the light to stave off the darkness? Because the darkness doesn't go away, and
Mm.
especially when you're still in the life.
Well, yeah, the answer to your second question, not very well for me. Like, you know, how do I stay out of the darkness? Not very well. It's been,
Mm,
I wake up in the middle of the night most nights, um, but you know, 17 years. So we had an election in Orange County, and they were restructuring some of the things, and
mhm.
that's a difficult transition to make when you have one system that you've achieved great success in. And I had the support of the old DA Tony Rukakis, and he was an alumni of the unit. He really understood how that needed to be done. And then there was a new administration, and not criticizing them. Uh, in this, you know, but it 17 years was a very long time, and I
Yeah,
had you know, I had an amazing run, and there were changes that were happening in the office that I didn't really want to stick around for.
sure.
You know, and again, not a criticism, just the way things were. That's an effect of any election, I think.
Yeah,
But also, you know, I had it also becomes, you know, when something like that is your life, and it was my life for 17 years, you know, and I had some other things that I still wanted to do, and I was young enough to go do it. I got an offer from ABC News to go and do legal commentary for them, which was amazing.
yeah.
You know, that it was just what an awesome opportunity, and they've been so nice to me over the years, and you know, I'm still doing that. It's been five years. I'm about to renew my contract with them, and
Congrats.
uh, you know, and so there was, you know, the world's a big place, and you know, and also I thought I could do some good. Right now, I'm actually defending police officers as a large part of my practice, and they need that right now. You know, there's bad cops out there, of course. There's a lot of good ones that are suffering in ways that I think they shouldn't necessarily. And I got a couple of those cases. I'm helping them. I also do a lot of pro bono work for victims of sexual assault. I've
Mm,
spent probably way too much time doing that, you know, helping them navigate the criminal justice system. I've done a lot of that. So there's other adventures to be had out there, and plus for me, I was really hoping to be able to sleep through the night. That didn't last too long, um, but uh, but yeah, it was time for me. 26 years
yeah.
as a DA. My original plan was I was going to do it for 3, and then
Oh,
yeah, and then that my 3-year plan turned into 26, and
the
yeah, just
Gilligan's Island of
yeah, that's
professional
right. That's right.
plans.
Yeah, 3-hour tour. My 3-hour tour turned into Gilligan's Island, basically. But the reason why I stayed is it just got more and more interesting, and I kept
Sure.
getting more and more people, and I got better and better. Your skills increase, and it just, the job just becomes better and better over time, which is, they don't tell you that at the beginning. They should almost warn people that if you do this long enough, you really will learn to love it. And that's what happened to me. But it was time for me to make a change.
Yeah.
And you know, and I, you know, no regrets there. But I will say this: every time I'm driving around, if I see a crime scene, you know, with the yellow tape up, It's everything I can do not to stop my car and just go over and say, hey, you guys need any help?
Do you need
Yeah.
anything?
Yeah.
I have a lot of experience.
Got a warrant you want me to read? Got a theory you want to bounce off me on who might have done it? Yeah, I'm like one of those old police dogs, that gets retired and wants to get in the car and go.
Right.
So, but I miss it. But yeah, it was time for me. It was a good time to go. And I tried 52 cases while I was in the homicide unit, and I had a great run. I had more success than my level of intelligence should have allowed, and it was a good time for me to make the transition into the next phase.
Yeah. I got a couple more questions before we wrap, if that's good. So you quote in this book Burroughs, Descartes, Hemingway, even Napoleon, which leads me to think you're a reader. Is
I,
Matt
I
Murphy a reader, and what does Matt Murphy read?
Yes, sorry, it's my assistant. I am I'm a nerdy reader, number one. Yeah, I'm a total history dork. I majored in philosophy before I made this switch to political science, like every other lawyer. But I read a ton of history. There's a Instagram meme going around now on where people are asking their husbands or their boyfriends, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? Have you seen that?
Yeah.
Okay. Literally, I'm probably a 6 times a day guy.
Yeah.
Between Marcus Aurelius and all of the Roman military tactics and the history of it. I've been fascinated by it since I was a little kid.
Yeah.
And then to get really into the embarrassing stuff, I read. I'm a huge Tolkien fan.
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings stuff. I'm a complete nerd, and I can't get enough of it. And I actually listen to a lot of Audible, and
Yeah.
it's the stuff I listen to. I go through phases between nonfiction, like Into Thin Air, John Krakauer,
So
the
good.
mountain climb book, amazing,
So
right?
good.
But then I'm such a snob on that because so much of it is so good that if the next one loses me, then I go back into dragons and dwarves and sword fights and like the closest Tolkien stuff that I can get. There's some pretty good stuff out there.
Yeah.
Like Game of Thrones-esque sort of fantasy, high fantasy.
Yeah.
And I probably shouldn't admit that publicly, but yeah, that's what I read a lot of that. So I still nerd out on my philosophy.
Yeah.
And history, and love Hemingway, love a lot of Stoic philosophers, and then I love my dragons and sword fights. So
I've got some recommendations for you, so I'll give you those offline. There's no shame in the nerd game here because I have worn that badge my whole life and continue to wear. And I've just I had a student recently ask oh, what are your guilty pleasure bands or books? And I was like, I don't have any because I just like what I like now.
Yeah.
So don't just like what you like, and it's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Because we all have our things. And my degrees are in American studies, so the how and why of American history and culture. So
Right.
totally understand. I am laughing not at you, but oh yeah, that's me. I get that. I totally get that. One of the things that you talk about when you're talking about Rodney Alcala in that case is you touch a little bit on skateboarding culture coming up. And I just think of Dogtown and Z-Boys and Jay Adams and Stacy Peralta. And I had the incredible opportunity to get to go to the Orange County premiere of that and watch you know all of these legendary skaters drop into the combi pool while Suicidal Tendencies was playing at the Van skate park. It was amazing. But you touch a little bit on music aspects there. Are you a music guy as well? And what does Matt Murphy listen to?
Yeah. So when I was in high school, it was all basically you hit the nail on the head. And I actually I got to meet in a professional context Henry Rollins recently. So I was an old school punk kid when I was in high school. Loved all that stuff, especially on the beach. And those were crazy times, because there was a transition culturally from the Dogtown Z-Boys stuff. And I grew up in West LA, so we we'd go to a place called Marina Skate Park as kids and just see all those guys, and they were like gods to us, skateboarding around, and then it seemed smoking pot in the parking lot too. But we yeah, so musically back then, I mean, I grew up in the 80s, and so there was a great and thriving local punk rock scene. Used to
Absolutely.
see, the Red Hot Chili Peppers before they became so famous. But like all those great Orange County bands like Agent Orange, and there was X, and all the Blasters and the Plimsolls, and so
Yeah.
yeah, I was kind of a punk rock slash rockabilly kid. Back when I was in the day. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And I still embarrassingly like my playlists, I will always have some Clash on there. And
Of course.
but there's a lot of really good music still in Southern California. The Dirty Heads is great. Slightly Stupid is great. Sublime. There's almost almost every good LA band I probably have somewhere on my phone right now as we speak. Like
That's awesome.
from the Doors, to Real Big Fish down in San Diego, which is a ska band. Yeah, I need to grow up and actually get probably past that. I got to embrace country because everybody seems to like that so much, and I just haven't been able to get into it. So yeah, old school punk
Yeah.
was my thing.
So I worked for Henry for 2 years at the
Oh my
publishing
gosh. Okay.
house.
All right.
So
I
people were,
love that guy. He
yeah,
was fantastic. I really liked him. He's like, he's a cultural icon, right?
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And we just passed the anniversary of 9/11, and I was working in the office and Henry was touring, and like
Wow.
that, my 9/11 story is around people calling, being concerned that like Henry was on planes, and like it was a
Yeah.
very surreal day in the office. But yeah, and yeah, all that punk, that is at punk and rockabilly for sure. And I don't think there's any need to grow up. Like, you like what you like, and you've got a good eclectic thing. I always just ask because I have friends that are readers and writers, but that aren't music people, and I'm always shocked by that because I'm like, how? But you like words. I thought you
Yeah.
like words, so you don't like, no? Okay. So thank you for sharing that. And if you want some country recommendations, because I'm very specific about what country I like, because I don't like all country. A lot of pop country I don't like. I'll send you some playlists and we can see if we can get you in. Again, if it's not your thing, totally fine.
Well, the funny thing about that is that the thing I loved about old school punk was that it was, there's real energy in that music because they were starving to death. These guys. It's like Guns N' Roses' first album, Appetite for Destruction. They were like those
Oh
songs are
yeah,
you can once I don't mean it happens all the time with different bands, but back in those days it was a bunch of guys who got together, like the Red Hot Chili Peppers. They knew each other from high school
right.
and put together. So it's real. It's not produced, and what they're singing about is real, and at least the good stuff.
Well,
So
it was music with a message, right?
yeah,
Like, I
that's
think
right.
that so many of us that came up in punk and that kind of visceral music, right? Because it's really, you feel it. You're like, oh,
Yeah.
I know why I'm fired up right now. And it had a message. It stood for something versus, you know, a lot of the pop punk that is more, the lack of purple, the ennui of growing up in the suburbs,
Yeah, that's right.
It's
Yeah.
like, and so yeah, I totally understand that. I feel you on that. And here's the thing. Remember, with rockabilly, we're so close. We're so close to country. I think I just need to, I'll send
That's true.
I'll send you some
Very true.
stuff. I'll send you
Yeah.
some
All right. That's a deal.
stuff. But I thank you so much for taking time to talk with me today. I am I love this book, and you've done a really good job sharing these stories, and I'm excited that it's coming out on the 17th. And to your point about wanting to keep these stories in the public eye, right? Keeping them in mind, because that's how justice keeps happening.
I sure hope so. And here, for anybody that wants to see, it's the Book of Murder.
There it is.
It's up on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, Disney Books, and then also my local bookstore in Manhattan Beach, pagesofbookstore.com. They're selling signed copies. So yeah, hopefully people like it. I put myself out there, so I am no Hemingway, but it all came from the heart, and everything in it is true. So
You did a great job with it. A great job with it. So thanks so much, Matt. I really appreciate your time today.
Oh, really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.